And I asked him what he thought of this idea. I said, actually, Bapa, Father, do you think it would be appropriate to hold a conference, a Holocaust conference? And President Waheed closed his eyes and he was silent for about 30 seconds. Then he opened his eyes and he said, in Bali in 2007. And the host of the conference was Kiai Haji Abdurrahman Waheed, the former chairman of Nahdlatul Ulama and the former president of Indonesia. I was approached by Rabbi Abraham Cooper of the Simon Wiesenthal Center. It was a time when there was a great deal of Holocaust denial in the Middle East. And the gentleman in question, Rabbi Cooper, said, it was a tremendous response and rejection of this notion that the Holocaust never occurred happening in the West, but there's no response whatsoever in the Middle East. And it's my belief that perhaps only in Indonesia could this occur, that a religious leader would come forward and directly address the Holocaust. And I would appreciate it if you would speak to your close friend, Kiai Haji Abdurrahman Waheed, and ask him if he would sponsor a Holocaust conference in Indonesia. It took me 4 days to think about this because I knew how much trouble it was going to cause us. And I used my intellect thinking about this, and my intellect could not come to a conclusion. But eventually I gave up intellectually, and I just felt that we should do it. And I was in America at the time, and I would never discuss anything like this with President Waheed over the telephone. I could talk to him over the telephone, but I would never talk to him over the telephone about anything important. So I got on an airplane, and I flew to Jakarta, and I went to the headquarters of Nahdlatul Ulama, where he had his office, and I asked him what he thought of this idea. I said, actually, Bapa, Father, do you think it would be appropriate to hold a conference, a Holocaust conference? And President Waheed closed his eyes and he was silent for about 30 seconds. Then he opened his eyes and he said, yes, we will do it because it is the right thing to do. We held that conference, and on the evening before the conference, there was a joint editorial, a joint op-ed that appeared in the Wall Street Journal worldwide on the day of the conference, co-authored by President Waheed and by Rabbi Israel Lau, a survivor of the Holocaust as a child. He lost his mother, he lost his father, he lost everyone. And I should actually just mention in this context that there was a Holocaust survivor who came to that conference. And we had 20 Nahdlatul Ulama Kiais from Central Java. We had 20 young Hindu students. And this Holocaust survivor asked a simple question. He said, there's a lot of Holocaust denial going on, but I just have one question. If there was no Holocaust, where are my parents? Where are my aunts and uncles? Where are my grandparents? Where are my brothers and sisters? I lost them all, and I was the only one left. He had the people in that room in tears, including the Nahdlatul Ulama Kiais. And the impact of this was obviously significant. Now, this is what Nahdlatul Ulama is like. Kiai Haji Abdurrahman Waheed, Kiai Haji Yaghlu Stakov, people here often speak of him as a second coming of Gus Dur. We refer to Kiai Haji Abdurrahman Waheed as Gus Dur. And we love Gus Dur very, very deeply. There are people in the audience here who knew Gus Dur, such as Bob Hefner from Boston University, such as Reverend Miyake. He was a gentleman who touched so many human beings and so many lives. And he lived his life by example. He was famous. When I was speaking to the Wall Street Journal, actually, I introduced him to the editor of the Wall Street Journal op-ed pages the day before this op-ed ran. And President Waheed said to the gentleman, because the gentleman had told me already that he didn't want anyone writing for the Wall Street Journal op-ed pages anywhere in the world more than he wanted President Waheed. And I was speaking to them. He was in New York, and there was about 30 minutes before the paper went to bed. And President Waheed said, do you think I was clear enough? Think it was strong enough? And then he got off the phone, President Waheed, and the editor of the Wall Street Journal says, he's not wanting to change the copy at the last minute, is he? And I said, no, I think he's just telling you he stands behind what he's written. Then we hung up the phone, and President Waheed said to me, you know, Holland, tomorrow there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be very angry at us. And it's true, I never knew anything about Judaism until this conference, until I became friends with Rabbi Cooper. Because I was raised a Christian, I became a Muslim. I feel affinity with many world religions, but I knew virtually nothing about Judaism. But after that event, there were many people who were convinced that I was Jewish because I had helped facilitate that event. But President Waheed was known for saying, one of his sayings, Selalu jujur dan terbuka tak perlu takut, which means we should always be open and honest. There's no need to be afraid. Before he died, I spoke to President Waheed, and we had published a book, and the book was called The Illusion of Islamic State, and it had a tremendous impact in Indonesia, tremendous. President Waheed was the editor. Buya Shafi Marif of the Muhammadiyah wrote a preface. Kiai Haji Mustafa Bisri wrote the epilogue, and it was just laying out many of these issues that have been discussed here today. And this was possible in 2014. This is 2009, 5 years before the Islamic State conquered Mosul. The Nahdlatul Ulama had already written a theological refutation of the ideology of the Islamic State. And when we were talking about publishing this book, there were many people who knew what kind of upheaval it would cause in Indonesia. And I said to President Waheed, you know, there's some people saying maybe we shouldn't publish the book, it would cause a lot of trouble. Should we do so? And President Waheed said to me, you know, I already decided, that time he said, 40 years ago, I already decided, should we speak up? And he shouted, yes. And what he was referring to were events that occurred in Indonesia in 1965 and 1966 that Nahdlatul Ulama was involved with and this young adults movement were involved with. And I'm saying this right now because it takes courage to speak up. It takes courage in order to act. President Waheed was full of courage. Kaji Yahya is full of courage. People who are on this panel with me this morning are full of courage. And it takes courage in order to address the realities that confront all of us and the challenges that confront us in our day-to-day lives as individuals. But it also takes courage in terms of religion to look at what are the consequences of doing nothing and what are the consequences of acting. Because religious leaders are faced not only with issues involved in our own religious traditions, but also involved with engaging with the larger structure of society. And one thing I've always admired about Nahdlatul Ulama is the spiritual leadership of NU's willingness to act on the basis of conscience and act on the basis of principle. I believe this is deeply rooted in the soil of Indonesia, and so I'm extremely pleased and full of admiration that President Joko Widodo, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia, the Indonesian society has chosen to move forward to introduce religion for the first time at the center of discourse and decision-making within the G20, which affects so many lives worldwide. And one thing I would just say in terms of the criteria we were using in thinking about who to invite to this event is people whose courage we either knew or anticipated would be there. There's any number of people we might have invited, obviously, but as Imam Yahya Pallavicini of Italy said when he looked at the invitation list, he said, I'm really excited about this event because there's not a lot of people I know. I'm going to be meeting a lot of new people. It's like a new network. But it's really, in some ways, it's a network that never existed before because there are parts of some of you that know us very well. There's other people we don't know. But I just want to say that we appreciate your traveling all this way. The Center for Shared Civilizational Values invites you to work together in future years in bringing forward the message of the R20. Swami Mitrananda, whom I just met recently, as we had a bilateral with Sheikh Yahya Khalil Stakuf, said this needs to become a movement. I trust that it will become a movement. Then I will just, seeing my friend Abdul Wahab here, Sheikh Mohammed Al Isa left earlier this morning to fly back to Riyadh, Makkah. Sheikh Yahya and I went to the airport to say goodbye. We appreciate our friends from the Muslim World League. We appreciate doing this together. But equally, we appreciate each and every one of you. If there's been any shortcoming, we apologize sincerely, and we hope to see you again.